Hi, good morning. Happy Easter. Welcome. So glad to have you with us today to be part of this celebration and experience a unique thing because this is like the first choir I think I can ever remember us having in like a decade. So thanks, choir. Like, great job. Let's give them another hand. So my name is Wes, one of the pastors here. Again, great to have you with us. We're going to do, like we said, kind of jump back and forth between talking a bit about Easter, singing a bit about Easter, basically to make it a little less boring for our kids. Maybe for you too, we'll see. But I want to share with you just a few quick things as we think about the Easter story and what it means and why it matters to us. Thinking about your own life and your own experience, how many of you have ever in your lifetime, maybe now or at some point, encountered a sign that looks like this? Next slide. This slide here. You must be at least this tall to ride this ride. Anyone ever encountered that? I can remember like being devastated, honestly, visiting Disneyland as a kid. Older brother and sister, they're getting on Space Mountain, they're getting on the Matterhorn and all these things, and I was too small. And just like having to stand there with my mom, watching them have an amazing time. It was the most like disappointing, awful thing ever. Or how about a sign like this? Next slide. Anyone ever encountered this sign at the pool? This hot tub only for adults, sorry. And the hot tub, if you have experienced this, you know, is like 1,000 times better. Because the kids' hot tub, it's mostly like a warm bath. Nothing really good about it. The adult one is like actually hot, great temperature. They've actually got the good jets. And you're dying as a kid looking at everyone else just sitting there chilling in the good hot tub while you're sitting there and who knows what. So, yeah, I was trying to make it good. You know, the reality is there's all kinds of places in life that are restricted to us for any number of reasons. But there's one place, or at least one place in life that has no restrictions whatsoever. Can you think of what it is? At least one place. What are some places where there's no restrictions on it at all? Sorry? Church, yeah, good answer. Wow. Okay, what else? The grocery store, no restrictions there. Huh? I didn't hear it. Church, yes. Prison, thank you. Whoever said that. Wow. Well, I mean, I think there are restrictions as far as some. Well, the place I'm thinking of today, when I think about, especially as this relates to the Easter story, one place that has no restrictions whatsoever is disappointment. The experience of disappointment. You don't have to have lived a certain number of years. You don't have to be a certain height, a certain education level, nothing in order to understand and experience disappointment in your life. That's something universal to all of us. And when I talk about disappointment, I mean, this is included, but I don't mean experiences like you were excited because you thought you were going to have tacos or pizza for dinner, and then mom and dad made some like healthy thing that they saw on Facebook, or, you know, the yearly experience of disappointment that we have as Canucks fans. I don't mean that. What I mean is like those really hard, like gut punch level disappointments that are common to all of us. Maybe you gave everything you had to that presentation or that audition, and then still the job, the award, the part went to someone else. You shared one of your deepest, darkest secrets with a trusted friend, only to find out they didn't keep it in confidence and shared it with everyone. You've always been healthy all your life. You've tried to exercise, eat right, get your 8 hours, cold plunge, whatever, and yet test results come back and it's cancer. You always believed you had this great, strong family, and then your parents just sat you down and said they're getting a divorce. All kinds of things. I mean, experiences of like deep disappointment like that. There are no, even though we might want it to be different, there are sadly no age restrictions whatsoever on these experiences. But what you probably already know is that what can make those disappointing experiences even harder to deal with, even harder to go through, is many times just the way people try to comfort us in the midst of them. As we're going through it, shortly after it's happened, people come in with promise after well-meaning promise to try to make things better. Hey, listen, it's all going to work out in the end. Don't worry. I know this looks bad. I promise you, it's all going to be okay. I promise you, it's not as bad as it seems. I promise you, we can get through this. Only to learn after the passage of time, nope. No, actually, it can't. They were wrong. Not even lying necessarily, just wrong. In fact, if you're at all like me, I've gotten to a place now where I literally just say to people now, like, please don't promise me. Please don't promise me. Tell me you're going to do your best. Tell me doctors are doing everything they can to help. Don't promise me, because you can't guarantee that. You can't promise that. And I bring that up on Easter Sunday of all days, which I'm sure you're like, wow, happy Easter to you too. So glad I got dressed up and came out for this. I bring that up today of all days because if you didn't know, and maybe you've seen that little like cartoon, maybe it's the first time you've ever seen like the story of Easter, but actually the whole story of Easter takes place within the context of disappointment as well. As every hope that Jesus' followers had for him, who he was, what he was going to do, all came crashing in the moment Jesus is arrested, tried, beaten, and then crucified. And then that stone that is rolled across the grave as he's buried, being like this giant period at the end of a sentence. And yet what's unique, actually, about the story of Easter from pretty much any other story that's ever been told is that Jesus, he's actually able to make good on the comforting promises that he gave to his disciples before any of those disappointing things happened. Namely, he told them, I'm going to rise again. He made that promise and was able to make good on it. That is, like Jesus had the power to back up the comforting promises that he made. And we're going to get to that powerful moment of promise keeping. Really what the celebration of Easter is all about in the end, this keeping of the greatest promise. But in order to help us really understand that moment and that story, I want to spend a few minutes today looking at a different story from the life of Jesus that takes place about a week before any of the events of the first Easter took place. A moment of similarly disappointed hopes, but which Jesus also proved himself able to back up his promises. And we'll see why that matters as we go here. And it's a story that's found in John's Gospel, John chapter 11. So if you have a Bible with you, a Bible app, or there's even a Bible under the seat in front of you, if you want to turn there to that passage, if you're using the Bible under the seat, it's on page 760. If you're not using that Bible, I don't know what page it's on. But if you're not familiar with the Bible, big numbers on the page, those are the chapter numbers, smaller numbers are the verse numbers. So John's Gospel, John chapter 11. I want you to just kind of keep your finger in this. Keep it open so that as we talk about this story, you can follow along with me. And we're going to see just two things this morning as we look at this story. We're going to see Jesus' comfort in disappointment, and then we'll talk about Jesus' promise in disappointment. Just those two things. Okay, keep your finger there. Keep it beside you. We're going to do a bit more singing now. Okay, have you still got that passage open? John 11. Follow along with me if you still got it. Okay, so we're looking here, first of all, at Jesus' comfort in disappointment. Again, disappointment common to all of us. What is the comfort that Jesus offers in disappointment? So, as the story begins, we learn that Jesus has these three super close friends that live in a little town called Bethany, which is just outside of Jerusalem. How many of you have really close friends like this? Like not just like people you call my friends, my Facebook friends, my Instagram like people, but like true BFF friends, close. Okay, nobody, wow. All right, 4 people, amazing. Jesus did have friends like this. Okay, he would have put up his hand. His friends are called Mary and Martha and Lazarus, a family of 3. But what we read, if you look at verse 1, is that Lazarus is sick. It says this man named Lazarus was sick, and apparently not just sick like he's got a sniffle, he's got a cold, allergies or something like that. He's really sick. and he's actually at the point of death, close to dying. And we know that because in the verse 3, John tells us the sisters, they send word to Jesus saying, Lord, the one you love is sick. And it's not maybe obvious, or maybe it's easy to miss at first, but far more than just trying to inform Jesus about something, there's an obvious request behind the statement, right? There's a request. It's not just, hey, Jesus, FYI, Lazarus, your friend, not doing so good. Thoughts and prayers for Lazarus. What they're also saying is, and come do something about it. Come here and fix this. Because the friends had heard and seen Jesus do all kinds of incredible things through his life. They'd seen him heal sick people, cast out demons, calm storms. They'd seen or heard about him feeding thousands of people with a few loaves and fishes. So what they're basically saying here is, come do some of that miraculous stuff here and do it quickly. Your friend Lazarus, the one you love, close to dying. Now, if you look at verse 5, it makes it really clear that Jesus loves these friends. He genuinely loves them. It's not like sometimes we're oh yeah, we're super close, and then you talk to the person, they're yeah, I know them. But he genuinely loves Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. He loves them. But then knowing that makes what we read in verse 6 feel so much harder to understand. Because John tells us, so when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And we're just sorry, what? How does that work again? He loved them, so he stayed and didn't come and try to do anything? And it's not where I want to focus our attention this morning, because there's no way that these sisters would have had any idea of Jesus' intentional delay. They wouldn't have known that. They didn't have fine friends and they could be why isn't he moving? We sent the request days ago. They wouldn't have known that. So I don't want to focus our time necessarily there, but it is worth noting at least that the delays of God in our lives, or when God doesn't maybe respond how or when we've asked him to, doesn't necessarily mean that God does not also love us. Those things can both be true, because here we see them two living side by side. So just take note of that. But if you look now at verse 17, all the way down, you see that regardless of any awareness that these sisters have of Jesus' delays or not, what the sisters absolutely do still experience is the disappointing, really devastating death of their brother, as they just watch him slowly slip away, probably watching the horizon to be is he coming? Has anyone seen him? And then their brother just dies. He doesn't make it, and Jesus never shows up. In fact, John says here, Lazarus had now been dead and buried 4 days by the time Jesus finally shows up. And as you see now in verse 20, Martha, she's the first sister who come out and meet Jesus when she hears that he's finally come, while Mary, the other sister, she stays back at home. And we'll talk about why she does that in a second. But Martha, the first sister, she comes out to meet Jesus, and she's mad. She's mad, she's clearly angry, she's confused, which are super common responses to disappointment. So in verse 21, when she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, the clear question behind her statement there now is, so where were you? Where were you? Why wouldn't you come? Why wouldn't you say anything, do anything to help? I mean, you've said you love us in the past, sure, honestly, but here in this moment, I'm finding it pretty hard to see that here. I'm finding it pretty hard to believe that. And I wonder how many of us recognize ourselves in Martha's response to disappointment with Jesus. Where were you? What were you doing when I needed you? But as we see in verse 23, rather than rebuke Martha for her angry response, how dare you speak to me like that? Or even try to make excuses or explain away the fact that he wasn't there. Well, you don't know what traffic was like. You didn't see. Instead, look, Jesus pulls back the veil entirely and just tells her flat out this comforting promise, Martha, your brother will rise again. He just tells her what he's going to do right there in that moment to comfort her. Now, clearly, Martha doesn't understand what he said. She doesn't get what he's meaning. As she makes some comment there about resurrection on the last day, she says, right, I know he'll rise at the resurrection on the last day. There was some General belief among the Jews at this time that at the end of time, God was going to raise up his people, everyone at once, to enjoy his renewed creation. They all believed that, like resurrection someday. But then look, in response, Jesus comforts Martha with these words. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Verse 25 here. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Basically telling Martha, like, what I'm promising you in this moment is not hope either to like change the past or to fix something at some future date. The promise of hope I'm bringing you is right here, right now, standing right in front of you. And it seems, at least, Martha is. She is comforted in the moment by this hope that Jesus offers and this promise that he makes to her. But notice as we keep reading, we have a completely different response to disappointment with Lazarus' other sister, Mary. We're told in verse 29 that when Martha goes back to the house and she tells Mary, Jesus is calling for you, she leaps up and runs out to meet him in the same place that he is. But when you read in verse 32 here, although she says the exact same thing to him, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. She says it through tears at Jesus' feet rather than with like a pointing finger. She just breaks down and weeps at Jesus' feet. Another very common response to disappointment. But notice here now, in verse 35, we see that rather than say a word to her, offer her any kind of comforting promise, instead, Jesus just simply enters into the pain of the moment and he weeps with her. He just cries with her. Why? Why the two different responses, do you think? Like, why respond with promises of hope to comfort one sister, but with tears to comfort the other? Well, because as one author put it so well, sometimes people need the ministry of confrontation, like to bring the truth to bear on a moment, and other times they need the ministry of tears. We are limited, he said, so often in knowing which one to give because we all tend to either one or the other. And yet Jesus is the only one who can give the exact ministry we need exactly when we need it. The exact comfort we need, we could say, exactly when we need it. How? Well, because exactly as Jesus said to Martha, Jesus doesn't just come with a message of hope. I want to bring you a message of hope. He doesn't come pointing us to some future hope one day even. He is hope itself. He is hope itself now, here in the moment. And he came to bring comfort and hope into situations and circumstances that, from our perspective anyways, are beyond it. He's the only one who can do it. We'll look next at the promises that Jesus makes, but we're going to sing another song together. So we've looked at Jesus' comfort and disappointment. Last thing I want to look at together with you quickly here in closing is Jesus' promise and disappointment. Okay, his promise and disappointment. And what I mean specifically by that is the power behind Jesus promising. The power behind it, because no question, comforting and confronting Martha with the truth of who he is and what he can do, or entering into Mary's experience of suffering and just weeping alongside here. They're both comforting responses in the moment, aren't they? Like you and I would probably equally be comforted in the moment of disappointment by such actions from Jesus, making these incredible promises, just crying along with us. Absolutely. But then think about it. If that's all Jesus does, like if he just comes and has a good cry with Mary, or even more in particular, if he just promises that their brother will rise again, is Jesus truly offering comfort anymore? Or is he just really manipulating their emotions in order to just kind of distract away from the disappointment that they feel with him? It's making some big promises in the moment just to make them feel better. And how you answer that question is important. Like, what is Jesus really doing here? Like, because in order to comfort his own disciples about his coming death at the hands of the Romans, Jesus repeatedly promises that he himself will be raised from the dead. So he's making the same kind of big promise here in order to comfort his disciples. But if he's lying, if he's just like if he can't actually back up any of these promises of comfort, then is he really offering any comfort at all? Is it any comfort to their disappointment? I mean, ask yourself, in those moments when you're experiencing deep disappointment that we're all vulnerable to, every one of us, when you're in those moments, is all that you really want someone who's just going to say some nice-sounding things to you, promise some big things to just make you feel better in the moment? Or do you want someone who can actually follow through on what they promise to do, even if it's less than what you hoped for? Just someone who's going to do what they said in the moment. Well, this moment here, as it relates to Jesus, is exactly where, as I said when we began, we see how the Easter story is unique from basically any other story of disappointment that's ever told. Because as we keep reading, we see Jesus was actually able to make good on the promise that he'd made to these sisters. He had the power to back up what he said he'd do for them in this moment. As John goes on to tell us, beginning at verse 38, if you still have it open, we read this: Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. That word actually means more than just like upset and sad, but actually like mad. Jesus is sad, mad at like the experience, not at the people, not at the lack of faith, not at anything. He's mad at death and the sorrow and suffering that it brings to the world. And it was a cave, John tells us, with a stone laid across the entrance. Jesus says, "Take the stone away." "But Lord," Martha said, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days." Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took the stone away, and then Jesus looked up and he said, "Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Imagine standing at the grave of a dead person who's been there 4 days, pulled the dirt off, and then saying, "Get up and come out." But look, verse 44, "And the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said, 'Take off the grave clothes and let him go.'" Wow. Which tells us two incredibly important things that we need to know, and I'll close with this. First of all, if Jesus has power over death like this, such that he can call a guy who's been dead 4 days in the tomb that he was buried in to come out, and he does, like the dead guy actually comes out, then what he promised his disciples about rising again after being crucified, the fundamental claim of the Easter story, then that must also be possible, right? It means that when Mary and then later Peter and John come to Jesus' tomb 3 days after he's been crucified and they find it empty, it wasn't because they came to the wrong place. It wasn't because someone had just stolen the body in order to try to make it look like he rose, but because he'd kept his promise. He'd kept his promise and rose from the dead. It means every time. Every time that Jesus told his followers throughout his earthly ministry, "Yes, I'm going to be crucified, but I'll be raised again." That is, he told his followers in chapter 10, just a chapter earlier, saying, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again." He wasn't just saying nice-sounding things to try to make them feel better. He wasn't trying to make himself, make his image greater in their eyes. No, there was power behind the promise. This story shows us he has power behind his promising. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is this: if Jesus has power over death, then it means also, as Jesus also promises, that one day, for all who put their faith and trust in him, when you and I close our eyes for the last time, and we take our last breath, Jesus will also call out your name and raise you to new life by that same power, and now never to experience death again. As Jesus plainly says in John 6, he says, "And this is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of those he has given me, but raise them up on the last day. For my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have life, and I will raise him up on the last day." Faith and trust in Jesus, who he is, what he came to do, is all that's required in order to experience this same hope. As I said when we began, the Easter story, right, it also takes place within the context of disappointment. We've seen that. But as we just saw in our passage today, right, however disappointingly it begins with Jesus, the story always ends in resurrection. With him, we can trust and believe. The story ends with resurrection, as well as a promise of living hope for all, as Jesus demonstrates his power over our greatest enemy, death. Which, if you didn't know, is exactly why we make such a big deal about Easter in the church every year as followers of Jesus. First of all, because if this story is true, what it means is that, first of all, Jesus really was who he said he was. He wasn't just some guy saying crazy things or just trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. He really was who he said he was, because he was able to take his life back and raise from the dead. It means he can offer that to us. That's the second great thing, right? Because if his resurrection is real, and his promise is that his resurrection will then be ours, he promises to raise us up for all who trust in him. And lastly, what we learn from this, the great hope of it, and the great hope of the Easter story, is that if we can trust Jesus to make good on a promise like this, to raise from the dead, if we can trust that he can keep that promise, then surely he can make good on every other comforting promise that he's made to us as well. New life, forgiveness of sins, rest and restoration, healing, strength and weakness, on and on. All these things, if he's able to keep this greatest of promises, then surely he can keep every other comforting promise that he's made to us as well. That's the true hope of Easter. Amen.